to Science Cafe for what month are we in? April. And, you know, the way this starts is by thanking the staff of this wonderful lunch. They open for us on Tuesdays. I want to thank Nick, Heather, Chris. Heather's daughter is here, Kelsey. Thank you, Kelsey. And this is our way of repaying. I want you guys to really eat and drink and drink and drink and drink. And that pays them back, okay? Because this is otherwise a no-fee thing for us. I'm not sure who else from Science Cafe. I'm Ann Parson. I help manage with Grant O'Reilly over there, Pat, Elizabeth. These are UMass people. Laura Gardner, Grant, Bob Rocha back there. He's got a new shirt on. This really looks good tonight. He got it at Kohl's, and it looks like it came from Brooks Brothers. Anyway, I'm so pleased to have here Debbie Gordon tonight speaking on the escape artist methane and new tools to detect the super potent climate pollutant. So Debbie has the Oil and Gas Solutions Initiative for Rocky Mountain Institute's Climate Intelligence Program, and she's also a senior fellow at the Watson School of International and Public Affairs at Brown University. I met Debbie about a year ago, exactly, in Phoenix, that city that's burning up there. And we were at an environmental conference, and she was on a panel discussion about methane. And it just unbelievable discussion about how many wells, gas and oil wells in this country are not capped and releasing methane just like this. There are 125, at least, 1,000 of these orphan wells. And all that methane is just pouring up in the sky across the country. Unplugged, abandoned, leaking methane. So the group who's trying to stop this leakage, instead of drill baby drill, the outcry is plug baby plug. Anyway, it was a fascinating discussion, and I found myself in the elevator with her, and I thought maybe she was from Phoenix, but it turns out she was from Providence. So we're so lucky. I'm going to go on a little bit longer to say she just got back from the 250th anniversary of the discovery of methane, which is also called inflammable air. It took place in Italy, and she wrote a little piece about her background on LinkedIn. She said, I am headed to Ispra, Italy, to celebrate the discovery of methane 250 years ago. The chemist Alessandra Polta collected this gas as it bubbled up from a swamp and then lit methane on fire. My amazing colleagues and I are assembling a plan that had to stop this powerful pollutant from leaking and harming people on the planet. For me, this is a journey of a lifetime. My Italian mother was born in Genoa, a weekend Joan from Como, where Volta was born. My German grandfather was a physical chemist turned medical doctor who instilled in me the drive to ask critical questions, think scientifically, and never stop learning. As a newly graduated chemical engineer, one of my first assignments as Chevron was brushing soapy water on valves, flanges, and other oil field equipment to find leaking gas. And she concludes, chasing methane is in my DNA. I even wrote a book about it, No Standard Oil, Managing Abundant Petroleum in a Warming World. So we're just so lucky to have this expert on methane. Thank you for being with us.
I really give a lot of credit to Anne because we've been talking about this state for a very long time, and she really, 100%, she pursued it. I think it goes without saying that gas is methane is I will say gas is a chemical mix-up of everything, but it's mostly methane. There are other things in natural gas. Some things are really dangerous, like benzene, but I just wanted to say that up front and then give you a statistic that actually shocked me and see what you guys think. There is as much methane being emitted from the global oil and gas sector as the amount of gas that's going through the street, that was pre-war going through the Strait of Hormuz. So we are all freaked out about losing 20% of that throughput because of the war in Iran, but 100% of that gas is what we're throwing away year over year, which is really telling to me, because if we didn't leak that, it could change, you know, the economy of this energy sector and really help make things work a lot better than they have been working. So if you don't know, just to give you background on methane, generally, it's an easier pollutant than CO2 in the sense that it's only emitted from 4 sectors. CO2 is emitted burning energy, exhaling, everything you do is CO2. But methane is oil and gas and coal, agriculture, most rice, and then also cattle, feedlots, and landfills, waste and wastewater. Those are the sectors that emit methane. And it is a very powerful pollutant. It is 80 times more impactful than CO2 in its short decade-long lifetime, which is why we probably didn't chase it a generation ago when we were really building up CO2 in the atmosphere and all climate action was focused on CO2. But not having made enough progress on CO2, what's happening is now the bathtub is full with CO2. And it's going to take 100 or hundreds of years to really remove that from the atmosphere because it lives that long. But now we're like turning on the spigot really fast on a full bathtub of methane. And what's happening is that we are superheating the planet from this very powerful, potent greenhouse gas that is also heating up the planet faster, liberating more methane from natural sources, like the swamp that I was at in Italy. Because anytime you have plant growth, you actually, in an airless environment, you can generate methane. That's like swamps and landfills. But then you also get it from fossil fuels. So many stories to tell about this oil and gas sector. One thing is that gas used to be regional. That's the history we've been in. We've been in 100 years up till now of being an oil economy that had unwanted gas. And unless there was a pipeline there, the gas was thrown into the atmosphere in order to get the oil, because we need oil for cars and for planes and for roads and for tires and for clothes and for everything else. But this is all changing in real time, and part of it is in response to what we've all been doing constructively. So we're starting to electrify vehicles, and we're starting to change our habits on oil here slowly over time. And what that's doing is it's flipping the industry to be a gas and oil industry. So now, and you can see this with what's going on in Iran, more and more gas is traveling in liquefied fashion. You have to supercool it to negative temperatures, turn it into a liquid, it becomes liquefied natural gas, LNG, and then you can move it all over the world. So gas is moving from what was a very regional, somewhat local, unwanted byproduct, maybe I can use it, maybe I can't, to a very global movement of gas around the world. And so Renee and I were talking earlier, about this whole movement that we want to get off fossil fuels. I think that there's a lot of nuance there, because you end up with very strange things with economics and oil and gas, which I'll mention in a second. But the first thing that's probably going to happen, and I'm seeing it now, is this oil economy is turning into a gas economy. And that means we really have to stop it from leaking, because once this is a commodity that moves everywhere in the world, it's small, it's invisible, and it's under pressure. It wants to escape, and I love the escape artist way of thinking about it. But one of the things that makes it so hard to get off of oil and gas is that you have this very circular reinforcement. And a part of this reinforcement is why we can depend on getting oil and gas any day of the week and not pulling up to a gas pump and having a line or having no gas available. That is that when the demand is high, the price goes up. When the price goes up, the supply goes up because you poke more holes in the ground and you find more. Then you get oversupply because it's an industry that's a herd, and when the price is high, they all run in. This happens in a lot of supply chains. And so then you end up getting, so from the high prices, you get oversupply, and oversupply means the price goes down, and when the price goes down, you get more demand. So it's this movement. And that's what has happened for the last 135 years in this oil and gas sector. And a very big concern is that we won't necessarily be easily able to get off of everything anytime soon, because the same flywheels can happen in the gas sector that's been happening in the oil sector. So what are we going to do about this? And this is what Ann and I have been talking a lot about, is first of all, you can't see methane. Like I said, it's invisible. Until it gets to like that last mile, it's odorless. They put mercaptans in it so it smells like rotten eggs, but gas, when you're in the field or you're in the pipeline, upstream they call it, you can't see it or smell it at all. So a whole array of detection methodologies are coming out of the ground. And I'll start with the sky, because it's always the most exciting. So you have satellites that are being launched that can actually detect and measure methane. We're involved in one of them called Carbon Mapper. It's a nonprofit. It's amazing. And it came out of a group of scientists from NASA. They're going to be launching more. They have one satellite up. They're in prep for launching 2 more. And the idea there is they are spotting, it's more of a telephoto lens. There are satellites that actually target and see a very large area, and there are satellites that have much more of a point, more like, not a wide angle lens, but more of a telephoto lens. This satellite, Carbon Mapper, is telephoto, and it sees super emissions. So any large source, not just from oil and gas, but especially landfills as well, any large source of methane that is over 100 kilograms an hour, and they're finding things that are in like tons of methane per hour. Remember, multiply that by 80 to get CO2, so it gets very big very quickly. They can spot those, and they're having more and more success when they do spot them, telling an operator of an oil and gas facility or a landfill or a cattle feedlot, you probably don't realize this, but you've got a really big emission on your hands. And very often the operators are unknowing. Sometimes they're doing bad things, a lot of on purpose. A lot of times they don't know. You know, it's just not, it's going out undetected. There's a broken piece of equipment, or there's an event that happened with pressure, and it's just the equipment is behaving a certain way. So then there's the satellite part. Then you get down to the next level. There have been many studies on aircraft flyovers. The limitation getting down to aircraft is you can't fly in certain places. We know that one place, for example, that has a lot of methane leakage is Turkmenistan. Well, we're not getting approvals to fly in Turkmenistan, or Iran for that matter. So you get down, and a lot of studies have been done in the US, in Mexico, in Canada, places where you can fly and really understand the whole ecosystem of what's on the ground. Then you get down to the next level, and with sensors on the ground, on cars, in different ways that are around. You have lasers that are on perimeters of fields that operators put in to look. The best operators out there see that methane's a commodity. It's not really a waste. It's such a unique proposition in the oil and gas sector. It's the only one I can think of, actually, where the pollutant, the thing that will harm you, is actually for sale. Usually pollutants are the bad stuff that happens out of doing constructive stuff. You know, you'll end up getting air pollution. Well, I can't sell air pollution. I can't sell smog to you, but I can sell gas to you. So it's one of those very unique propositions where the opportunity for banks, for insurers, for companies to realize that reducing this methane leakage means keeping more gas in the pipe, which means selling more of their commodity. And I think that's what will make this more successful than anything we've ever done before. And in fact, we were contacted by an insurance company, Chubb. They were really interested, and we built them a methane intensity calculator because their proposition was so interesting. It wasn't about climate change at all. Their proposition was that gas leaking is actually related to safety of operations. And if you're not going to operate safely, then I need to take that into account to how I insure you. And if you're going to be more risky, and I'm going to have to pay out more due to your risk, then I'm not going to underwrite you. So Chubb set out a threshold above which, a methane intensity leakage threshold above which, they will not underwrite a company, which to me is the single best way you get to an environmental harm. We need regulation, and it's really necessary to pick up the rear, but the most important thing is to bake these things into the way they operate. The way the businesses operate become really, really important. So what else was I going to tell you? What else? I'm trying to think. One thing that I hit up against a lot, especially with the environmental community and with students, people that are pretty young in their career or are very aspirational, I would say, which I think we definitely need aspirations, but I sometimes feel like it needs to be mixed up with the reality of what we're facing, is that this transition that we've all been hoping for and wanting in terms of fossil fuels, getting off fossil fuels, we do no harm, and in fact, we probably benefit ourselves by doing two things at once, which is what this No Standard Oil book is about, which is we waste less, we throw away less, we get off of the most intensive, the most energy intensive, emissions intensive assets first. So you're actually improving the efficiency of a system as you move away from the system, as opposed to hoping that you're going to get off fossil fuels, and then the last fossil fuels standing are the ones that waste the most, they emit the most, which is not very helpful. So putting these two things together of a transition together with operating better, we were just talking before about repairing gas lines all over Massachusetts and, well, Rhode Island's slower about replacing its gas lines. I think Massachusetts is beating us on that one. But there's been a big fight about whether you should replace infrastructure, because infrastructure will live for another 30, 50, 70 years, and everyone wants to get off of fossil fuels, so don't fix anything. But the reality is then you're leaking a lot in all of those decades leading up to this transition, and there's been this kind of fight within the community to fix the leaks, and I think I'm definitely on the side of especially super emitters, things that are leaking in outsized amounts cannot persist. This is not helpful, plus it's quite dangerous. I really want to talk to you guys more than talk at you guys. I want to hear your questions. It's more fun for me to do it that way. Should I change over? Yes. Okay. I would love to hear. Yes. The question was that in the permafrost, especially up in the global north, as ice is melting, it's trapped a lot of both methane and CO2 in it. And in a way, it's kind of been our freezer. It's really helped, preserve things. And now, as the planet heats, the permafrost is melting. And in melting, it's liberating these gases that were trapped. There's enough methane hydrates, frozen methane crystals, even in the world's oceans, that dwarfs the permafrost. So if we truly were to warm the oceans, it's game over, although the oceans are quite cold and they're quite large. So then the question is, what do we do about that? And at this conference I was just at, and it was held at the European Commission's Joint Research Center, one of the big EU labs, one of like our national labs. And it was scary. I mean, I'm pretty optimistic. I don't know why. I think it just runs in my DNA to keep looking for things. But one of the really scary things that was said there is that we're starting to see tipping, where it used to be the majority of the world's methane was from man-made, from human sources that I mentioned in the beginning. And now, because of that phenomenon of melting permafrost and warming swamps, warming wetlands, we're seeing the liberation of natural methane. And the problem there becomes, as the world warms for more natural methane, it's going to bring more warming to the climate with more natural methane coming up. And then you start to get this cycle that continues. And I do think that the hidden benefit of going for man-made methane, especially oil and gas, which has this profit motive behind it, because it is their commodity, it's such a powerful, fast pollutant that if we stop it now, it's gone. It's not like CO2 that lives forever. We're committed to all the CO2 we put into the atmosphere for generations right now. Like my grandparents' CO2 from the cars they first bought is still in the atmosphere. That's not how methane works. If we don't leak that molecule now, that degree of warming is not there. And so it just doubles us down on stopping the man-made methane, because that's what will stop that cycle. If we're not smart about it, we'll see that cycle continue. The only other thing I want to say about this, we are working with, both RMI has an accelerator lab, an investment innovation accelerator lab, and we work with a group called Spark Climate. They're working on understanding methane removal. So this is the way of the world. And I don't think it's any different in health, quite honestly, if I think back. First you have like your own, what you were born with, then you have your own diet, and then you have pills and technology and things that you have to intervene. Well, we're in the same world when it comes to climate change. You've got mitigation, which is what we've been at for a generation here, to try to stop emitting as much as we are. Then you have adaptation, which means we better raise our house on stilts, or we better rebuild the bridge a different way, because you have to adapt to climate change. And then the third rung that we are definitely going to get into is climate engineering. Because if things get bad enough, and it won't be everywhere, it will be in places where it's really bad, wildfires are a good example, then we're going to have to engineer our way out of it. And I don't think that there's any escaping that. And so we do have these different levels of help on the way, but they will have side effects, just like a pill does. Like, you can take a pill, but you're gonna might have some side effects from that pill. So I think that's just the way of the world. I've written about climate engineering, and as a chemical engineer myself, I can see it's like an experiment on top of an experiment on top of an experiment. We have all these orders of experiments that we're doing on the atmosphere, but I do think it's a reality. Yeah. Okay, the question is there any opportunity for using methane as fuel? Remember, methane is natural gas. It is a fuel.
Capturing it.
Yes. So there are, first of all, companies actually use it. Like if you go on to an oil and gas company on a platform, a lot of the equipment is actually run on the gas that they're producing, that they might not have a pipeline for, so they're using it. There's also the whole essence, I don't know if you've read about this, I don't like the term that they use, renewable natural gas, but there is the collection of gas from landfills that's used. That's a fuel. And more dairies are starting to try to collect the gas from cows and use it. Now, a lot of this, and this is true of the energy sector overall, another thing Ann and I were talking about earlier, that you've got this interesting complexity as we've grown to a world of 7 billion people, which is, it's a global enterprise, so obviously using that gas needs a big infrastructure. If you're going to use volumes of gas, you need, like, that's why we have an oil and gas industry. But there's a lot of local, need and want to have certain local things. Solar on your roof, maybe renewable gas coming from a landfill that goes to homes in the area or businesses. But I don't know that those things are integrated enough and big enough to be the whole solution, but they're definitely part of the puzzle.
Can you
give us a little teach-in on how a big dairy farm would harness the gas from the cows and whether it smells any different than that with the added gas?
You know, it's a really good question, and I will preface that I don't work on agriculture, but I've been around these talks enough to be able to answer low level of what you're asking. So a really big, two things come up in dairies. One is changing cows' diets so that they have less gas in their gut, in their system, which does change smells when you have less gas in your system, and they will emit less gas. And then the other part of the dairy equation that goes a little bit more to methane removal systems is that it's the manure ponds that emit a lot of gas. So you both have the animal, but also the design of the enterprise that are a really big part of the problem. The dairy industry is tough. Food is really hard. I'd say more than energy, probably the most concern politically in the world is often around food and hunger. You know, it makes for very unhappy populations to not be fed. And so dealing with meat, milk, food waste, which is the big issue in landfills. All of the methane in landfills is from organic waste. Like, you shouldn't have any leftovers tonight, by the way. You should finish everything by your plates. So those are the different things. But yes, there's a lot of work going into dairies. The big question will be, are people willing to try this? Bigger, larger enterprises might. Independence, the same is true in oil and gas. You get really big international oil companies, think Chevron. Then you get national oil companies, think Aramco in Saudi Arabia. And then you get loads of independents. And so the innovation space, whether it's in dairies or in oil and gas or any sector, have a lot to do with the size and capacity of the operator. And the big ones have a lot of spotlight on them, and they have more money behind them, and it's easier to innovate. The smaller and more, in any of these enterprises, you go down the chain, get into like marginal wells, which I should talk to in a second. You get to the end of the life of a well, and it's been sold many times, and maybe an operator of record doesn't really, you have never heard of this operator before that will own it, and no one's really operating it properly and it's leaking. So we're doing, RMI created a marginal well map. You can look at it online. It shows at the county level where all the marginal wells in the United States are. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. But they're often passed down, and it gets harder to work with that, you know, for the same question, because you end up with very small enterprises that don't have a lot of capacity. But there's a problem there. So you have to think on multiple scales when it comes to a lot of this. Yeah. So the question is, what has the current administration's impact been on research and funding? It's a hard one to answer. A really big thing that went away with this administration is regulation. So we've lost a lot of backstops through governmental action. The research has not been really, it's not been good. I don't want to candy coat this. Like a lot of NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, right at the time of the wildfires going on in Altadena, were let go. There's been a lot of attrition, EPA's research lab. There's been a lot that's changed, honestly. But the scientists that I work with that are more related to atmospheric research, really understanding, like, you know, we just put up Artemis. Like, you need to understand the planet to do what we're still doing. They've been less affected by this. There's been some movement of those scientists into the corporate sector, which I think is great, actually. The chief scientist of NOAA ended up at a bank. I can't remember which one, JP Morgan, I can't. So it's like there's been out of desperation, people have gone into other spaces and kept their knowledge with them. So it's not gone away. But I'm happy to say this quest to stop methane emissions has not been, I don't want to say it out loud, but it's still pursued. And a lot has been pursued by Europe, which is very helpful. And at the COP, I was at the COP in Brazil, this is a big climate conference that goes on once a year, and it was in Brazil this year. Lots of talk about methane. The United Kingdom put out a big declaration that they were going to really advance on this. So it hasn't stopped this international, I think it goes to that question before, there's a fear out there of runaway warming. And so there's a lot of intentionality. And weirdly, when the US steps back, others step in. So when I was just in Europe, very thankfully, you could feel the European Union and the UK coming out of Brexit and rejoining the European Union, coming out of the woodwork. Like, okay, if they're not going to do it, we are. And so I don't think it's not lose-lose. Not win-win right now, but it's not lose-lose. Yeah. So the question was about composting, especially large waste, like say from a grocery store. Can't say I'm the expert on this, but I think I would say as an engineer, if your composting system is not venting its waste, and also if it's done in a dry environment, which compost is. You know, what makes swamps and landfills and manure ponds so devastating is their wetness. And so doing this in a dry environment really helps stop the methane from forming. And so there are very smart ways to do it. So definitely composting is a good thing. Because throwing organic waste otherwise into that landfill that rains and, you know, is being moved around all the time, that's where it's not good. So the question was, with these satellites, you can spot plumes from above, and then what's the protocol to do something about it once you spotted it? So there is the United Nations set up this International Methane Emissions Observatory called IMEO. And IMEO set up this, I don't know if I can get all the words right, but set up this program called MARS. And MARS is the Methane Emissions Response System, right? So a combination of things happen depending on where it's happening. California is doing its own thing. It actually funded to have this carbon mapper satellite that I am collaborating with. And so the Air Resources Board in California gets all the information. They reach right out to the operator. That's like the best class, where you have that intentionality right there. And they're finding a lot of dairies. Not as much, they don't have a lot of oil and gas anymore in California, but there is a lot of dairy and landfill waste in California. Then you get to the situation of other states. Colorado's a good example where they are all in on it. You know, they're producing oil and gas. They don't want it to leak. And interestingly, the Colorado oil and gas is right on top of people. Unlike West Texas, the Colorado oil and gas is outside of Boulder, where very wealthy people live. And so this is always a better combination to put something to deal with close to people that have a financial reason to care about it. And so that really makes the regulation and the policy and the governor's action much more intentional. And so they have set standards for, you know, see something, say something. If it's spotted, they have great regulations ahead of, and then when the satellite sees something, they're ready to act. Then you get to this middle ground of some of the rest of the United States and other countries in the world where I think IMEO, this UN construct, maybe it's a good thing, it's improving. It went from a 1% response rate where a plume was seen and then everyone was contacted and 1% responded, and now this past year it's up to 12%. So we're getting there. So, you know, it depends on where it is. Turkmenistan had a very unfortunate event back in the 70s. They were drilling for oil and gas, and they blew open the top of a gas cavern. Blew it open. So now there's a crater that's bigger than the size of this entire room, that's open to the atmosphere, that's just venting oil and gas. Several years back, they lit it on fire just so it wouldn't vent the gas, it would now burn the gas, but it's not burning it completely. So you end up with a country like Turkmenistan, and they have challenges. Like, you can see it, a plume, but contacting them and knowing that they can really deal with it is hard. And I would venture to say everything going on in the Middle East now, it's also, you know, it's hard to act on things. But there's definitely a way forward to do this now.
methane?
Yeah, so the question was about state versus federal regulations on methane. Something happened under the Biden administration that got us very excited. And of course, it was not ditched totally. The current administration just put it on ice. So it's not gone, but it's not in effect. They put a fee on methane. So if you were an oil and gas company and you were venting your methane, you would pay an emissions charge on methane. I was so excited about this, A, because we've never successfully charged for CO2. There's been no carbon tax that we could ever get passed in this country. But also because I really believe that the best way to deal with things, first off, is monetarily, because money talks. And regulations are good, but then you have to enforce them, which is hard. So the methane fee was going to do two things. It was going to charge those that were not behaving properly, and then create more competition for those that were, because those that were avoiding a fee, and those that were behaving poorly were paying the fee. So you're spreading this competitive price between these different entities. And oil and gas is a very competitive business. If I'm paying a little bit more than you, I'm going to be motivated to change my behavior because it's going to affect my bottom line very quickly. So that was one really big loss in federal regulations. We, RMI, we're working very closely with states now, especially Colorado, New Mexico, California, and Pennsylvania are the big supply side states. And then we're working with demand states, those that have no, well, there are many states that have no oil and gas, but we're working with New York, Illinois, California, Michigan, Nevada, those 5. And the goal here is to actually create a buyer-sellers alliance. So the buyers of oil and gas are demanding low leakage from their gas from the sellers. So you're, again, trying at the state level to create a market for oil and gas. There is an entity that certifies openly the leakage of oil and gas called MIQ, but there's now more gas under certification than there is demand for it. So you need to kind of complete that circle of, I want it, and if there's even a slight premium, I'm willing to pay for it. Right now there's no premium, there's more supply than demand, but at a certain point, if you're gonna really stoke this market, you're gonna have to reward people for doing that. So there's a lot of state action on this, uneven, but a lot of state action.
West Virginia, coal mines? Nothing there, I bet.
No, interestingly, the work that we're doing on coal is China, because China is the biggest coal producer. So we figure, and also weirdly, the Chinese government, their new 5-year plan, they are all into energy. Like, this is not, you know, not hidden from them that they are an energy enterprise. They need a lot of energy. They don't want it leaked. They want a lot of options. They're really pursuing renewables. They're not going to turn away from coal. You know, they're trying to do their own business better to waste less. So maybe, just maybe, if China innovates, West Virginia could pick up on it. Maybe Chinese companies could pick up on it. Oh. So what are the big consequences of it, and what can people do is the question. So this is very much a health issue. Methane, natural gas has a lot of stuff in it. Like I said, benzene is a carcinogen. If it comes in a sour form, I don't know if any of you watch Landman, but Landman on Paramount Plus, I've written a couple of articles about it. It stars Billy Bob Thornton in this. This is a spoiler alert. But in the first episode of the 2nd season, all these hunters die from H2S, hydrogen sulfide poisoning. So there's H2S in gas, not in the gas in our homes, but but in the gas upstream. So health, definitely. Energy security, I would say, is a really big thing. Like that first statistic I said when I started speaking, the idea that we're throwing away all of this methane/gas at a time when we're realizing that the global economy is not functioning well with 20% of that supply being shut off from the Hormuz. It's like, but wait, we're throwing all that away. So definitely energy security. On your second question, I have a much harder time, I have to admit. So I started my career in the oil and gas industry thinking I was going into renewables, but I graduated undergrad during the Iranian Revolution, and the price of oil and gas the price of oil at that time went from $160 a barrel in today's dollars to, by 1990, $17 a barrel. This is this industry that keeps that flywheel going. And so when I graduated, it was like, oh, well, I'm not getting any of these jobs because they all fell into the valley of death. And I went to work for Chevron and realized after the 5 years I stayed and then moved on to I went to the new concerned scientist next, that I should really work on demand. So I worked on the use of oil. I worked on transportation policy for much of my career until in 2010 I came back to oil and gas because it was really interesting when fracking started. But what I was going to say to answer your question was I found transportation policy entirely relatable. Every one of you would relate to anything I said on driving, on biking, on roads, on traffic calming, on no matter how arcane what I said, you'd all experience that. For better or worse, and I think on the margin for better, because there are so many billions of people on Earth that make changing those consumer decisions so hard, methane is an industrial problem. That means it's farther from all of us, which isn't helpful for me to say that to you. But it also means that it takes far fewer actors to make it work. So I think letting your elected officials know that leakage is not acceptable, and that we have to fix things and not let them leak, and educating younger people to let them know that getting off of these resources is going to be hard, but we need to stop them from leaking down. So I think that there are things to educate, or even understanding what oil and gas is, for that matter, I think is really helpful. Thank you. The question was, when we liquefy natural gas and can move it all over the world's oceans, which is what's happening now, and that is the growth part of gas. That's what's really growing, is very thirsty Asia, Southeast Asia, wanting gas, because they want to get off coal. And to get off coal, they think they should have gas. And so it's just moving the puzzle pieces around in the energy space. But what happens with this liquefied natural gas, LNG, is that the supply chain is so long. Like, think about getting gas to your home. It probably, here for us, might be coming from Canada, probably Canada. So it's being produced, coming into a pipeline, and coming into our home. So that's like A to B. Liquefied natural gas, assuming it has a similar route, coming out of the ground from Canada, taking a much longer pipeline all the way down to Louisiana. So right now, you're like, I don't know how many more miles it is, but it's way farther, maybe 5 times longer of a distance, where it can leak anywhere along the pipeline, from compressors, from leaks in the pipeline, from maintenance, from accidents. Then it gets to an LNG liquefaction terminal. They have to supercool it with a lot of equipment and put it onto a ship. There can be leaks there. Then it gets on the ship and it travels halfway around the world, probably to Asia, and this is very cold. If any of the equipment is not working properly, it boils off. The gas wants to boil off. It wants to be a gas. It doesn't want to be a liquid. So then you have that leakage. Then it gets to where it's going, say China, and they have to regasify it. So they have to drop the temperature, and raise the temperature, drop the pressure, and let it go back into a gas. Now you have more equipment that can leak, and then it goes back into a pipeline. So you are 5 times and many, many multiples of miles longer with LNG, which means that the supply chain and the potential for leakage just takes that much more intentionality. And we're already not intentional enough about the system we have. And that's been the real concern. Yeah. So the question is, how do the LNG vessels get powered? Are they powered by their own gas? Or are they powered by something else? The question is both. It depends on the tanker. Some run on gas, many still run on marine fuel. And they don't, and interestingly, a lot of the answer to what that is the price of gas. If I can get more money selling that gas, and it's cheaper for me to use bunker fuel, which it always will be. The bottom of the barrel, the oil barrel, is like given away. Then it ends up going. So I think it will depend on the company and the ship. You don't agree? Yeah, I don't know. The price of gas right now is very, very high. But I think a lot depends more on how the ships were built. So if the fleet converts, it'll run on gas. But you'll still have the problem with gas in these engineered systems is it's under pressure and it's small. It wants to get out. So you just have to be, everything has to be tight. Every single thing, every single connection. This is when I was painting my soapy water at Chevron through all the connections. And it's really, really hard because there are so many connections in an engineered system with something under pressure. But listen, the genie's out of the bottle. Gas has gone global. And the interesting thing is if gas doesn't leak, it actually is much, much better for the climate than coal. If gas leaks, if it leaks over certain thresholds, it can actually be on par with coal from a climate perspective. Now, to be fair, coal has other things in it, like particulates, which are really bad for your lungs. So I'm not saying from a full environmental perspective, we should not be using coal anyway. But gas and coal have those kind of, gas is a double side when it leaks. You know, a lot of those investments are very dependent on where they are and what the demand is around them. So if you're going to have I would call these niche solutions, but I don't mean to say niche like they don't matter. I think it really depends on if there is a small supply chain that it really serves that displaces something else. So that's, I think, the real question. And what I didn't say on the bigger picture of all of this, and maybe this is a good closing note to think on, that because of energy poverty around the world, because of AI and data centers, because of climate change, pumping more water, cooling more air, repairing more infrastructure, we've always historically used more energy over time. It's been pretty linear if you go back and look, total energy. But we might be on a precipice of more of a, moving up at a nonlinear rate of how much energy we need, just because all of this coming together with more people on Earth at the same time. And the big question is, how are we going to deal with that contestation around energy? And if it means that the global north wants redundancy, like I want solar on my roof, I want a diesel generator in my backyard, I want an electric vehicle in my driveway for backup power, I want gas to my home. If we want all of those things for non-disruption, we're going to be using a lot more energy. And that maybe indirectly goes to your question. We're going to have to turn over every rock.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you. Short and closely. I'm sure there are questions still in your mind, so please feel free to come up and ask Debbie. Giving her the regular gift, which fell on the floor. It's very sturdy.
It's in pieces. They all know what it is.
We give it every
Oh,
year.
just kidding.
Every time. I have one other question. It's kind of it's a hard question. I read something just the other day that if the amount of methane going up continues at the rate it's going up, our planet doesn't, or life on our planet as we know it, doesn't have much longer. Is this true?
I know. This came up with the scientific community, and I mean, we're in an experiment, so I don't really have any answers, but we might have undue warming that's really hard for our systems and ourselves. But also, when there's too much methane in the atmosphere, it starts to limit itself. So it's very hard. I mean, this is chemistry, and I don't know if you guys think back to your chemistry classes in high school or college, but this is like real chemistry going on. And we don't really know. I just don't think we can afford to run the experiment to find out necessarily, like, turn it up and let's see what happens. But maybe that's why I'm optimistic. I believe in our ingenuity. I believe in certain systems having corrections into them. We have survived for a long time, but I don't want to run too long on that one because I don't know.
Yeah. You just said something really interesting. There's only so much space for methane, and it just reaches an equilibrium.
It gets to the point where it fights with this hydroxyl radical in the atmosphere, so they call it nature's detergent, and the hydroxyl radical reacts with methane. And they think one of the reasons why during COVID methane went up really fast. For a couple of years, we had unbelievable increases in methane in the atmosphere. It's been going up, but it went up more in double digits, much higher. And they thought it was because we weren't driving. Because the fact that we weren't driving had less NOx in the air, and less NOx in the air changed the hydroxyl radical in the air, which changed methane. So you have a lot of reactions going on at the same time.
Keep driving.
But now we're back to like normal driving and methane's going up, but not at those really, really high levels. But then another theory was that it's the heating. Like the reason why methane was going up very fast was we were seeing a lot of heating and the swamps were liberating methane. So a big part of my desire is to understand methane and its amounts more. I think it's a newer quest. I feel like we're still trying to get a handle on it. How much is really emitted for every sector in different amounts in different places, and what is guiding its reactions. And that's why I love these scientific convenings, because there's just so much knowledge and so much discovery going on.
I won't keep you too much longer, but I know there's one experiment that's been done. We could stop gas from coming out of cattle, methane, by giving them a little algae. We did this experiment at Science Cafe, and I think, well, we know how to do that. It stops them from farting. So, why are we doing this? Why isn't every farmer feeding algae to their cattle?
I think habits are hard to change. I think that's true probably for all of us. It's definitely true for a money-making enterprise, that a small change it's hard, So, but I do think that there are also tipping points and trends. When something becomes a fad or it happens and you see your neighbors do it and not get destroyed, or your competitors do it, then you catch on. So I think that's how, the solutions somewhat bubble up.
Okay. I'll let you go. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. So do stick around, ask more questions, and I wanted to let you know we've got two guests for the last for May and June, and they're both really as good as this lady. Our guest for May 5th is Our guest for May 5th is David Robinson, the Director-in-Chief Archaeologist of the Massachusetts Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources. And his topic is fantastic. He's going to discuss the surprise discovery of Revolutionary War shipwrecks in New Bedford Harbor and the important lessons learned. So, again, that's May 5th. Have a good month, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Lighters.